maybe some of the things that people are reporting when they think they're having a seizure, but we can't see it. Maybe they are little seizures, but we just can't see them. But often people are saying, I had a big seizure and I blacked out, and you can see that they're not. So we knew this was a hospital problem. But what's become really available in recent times is the ability to be able to record people at home, ambulatory EEG monitoring with video. And that's really been a huge change.
Fellow Homo sapiens, welcome to or welcome back to Epilepsy Sparks Insights. EEGs, or electroencephalograms, they come in various forms, but whichever type we choose, there is a lot of data collected from them. And there's a reason that we have specialist neurophysiologists and whole companies, in fact, whose purpose it is to effectively collect and try and analyse all of this big data. What looks like an insignificant little squiggle to the untrained eye can be of real significance when it comes to a diagnosis or treatment. And I can tell you, as an ultra lay person, when I listen to speakers at epilepsy conferences, one of whom is our marvellous guest today, my mind is absolutely blown away by what is involved and how little I understand. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to our channel. Only about 18% of our regular viewers and listeners are actual subscribers. People tune in every week, which is fabulous, but don't subscribe. So if you are one of the 82% that hasn't yet subscribed, please do so today. It is absolutely free, and having you on board helps us with the algorithms to promote our channel to more people who don't yet realise how fascinating the epilepsies are, or how underserved and in need so many millions of people affected are. Get ready to hear about the over and underreporting of seizures, the advances in ambulatory EEG monitoring, technological innovations in epilepsy management, and how this will help so many people with a refractory epilepsy. All from Australia with neurologist and epilepsy specialist Mark Cook from the University of Melbourne.
I can. Thanks, Torie, and thanks for having me along tonight. So, look, I'm a neurologist and I specialise in epilepsy, and I've been working in this area now for about 35 years. Really enjoyed every moment of it, and I still really enjoy seeing people with seizures and trying to help them through their life, and I enjoy as well doing research and trying to discover new things about epilepsy and ways to help people.
And how much of your time, percentage-wise, would you say is spent as a clinician and how much as a researcher?
Ooh, I would say probably I spend about 20% of my time as a clinician.
But that's what gets you into all the cool stuff, which we're going to be talking about if you've got 80% of your time. So I know you've got your finger in heaps of pies.
Sorry, Terry, I was going to say you need to be able to be seeing people to know what it is that's important to them. So that part's still really important to me.
No, totally. And do you find actually there's a lot that can be achieved by seeing patients and families face to face rather than doing everything remotely? What do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I mean, a lot of stuff you can do remotely, a surprisingly large amount, I think. And, COVID really was a big education as far as that goes. But it really is important to be able to meet people face to face. And, I always try to meet everyone that I've met before face to face, to be able to understand them and their families, and seeing them with the people around them, their partners, their parents, their carers, whatever, is a really, really important way of trying to figure out what's going on and understand what's important to people.
Indeed. And just for our audience, can you confirm, are you a paediatric neurologist or an adult neurologist?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm an adult neurologist. Years ago, I used to see paediatric patients, when I worked in a lot of rural spots and they didn't have very good access to paediatric neurologists, so I would see kids down there, but not for a long time.
And so the potential treatment and improvements to quality of life for people with epilepsy have improved considerably over the past 10, 20 years. Would you agree? Oh,
look, no question. And there's so much happening. So, I remember in my own family, when my dad had epilepsy, there was only like 3 tablets, more or less. And there wasn't much you could do with it, and people would shrug their shoulders, and people, neurologists and other clinicians didn't like seeing people with epilepsy because they felt helpless, that there was nothing they could offer them and there wasn't much they could do. And there are a few brave souls out there doing really radical things around surgery and so on, but they're really rare. And for most of the world, epilepsy was something that people didn't want to deal with, and they were, as I say, a little bit scared of it. So it's changed so dramatically in the last 20, 30 years. I can't begin to explain it. And I guess a lot of that was MRI. MRI suddenly made epilepsy understandable and the causes of epilepsy understandable. And I think that made a big difference. Once you can see there's something on a scan, it turns it into something mysterious, into something that you can identify a cause of. And the same with genetics, once people have got a way of understanding the condition has some sort of understandable basis, it alters the way people think about it. Not just the people with epilepsy, but the general community.
Indeed. And actually, talking about general community, that I think actually including clinicians, they're kind of, I think, more commonly now seeing how exciting, I mean, that sounds bad, but in terms of research and in terms of, you can actually achieve something with an individual and family now. I see that change. Would you agree?
I completely agree. I mean, you can do so much now, and there's so much interest and support which never used to exist. So I think, the whole epilepsy world has gone through such a big revolution over the last 20, 30 years. It's very hard to describe. So it's really exciting stuff, and so much new is happening, and it's making a big difference to the life of people with seizures.
And it's brilliant even for people who experience seizures, or even those who have controlled epilepsy. They can see, even if a new surgery or new technology might not benefit them directly or benefit anyone they know, it gives us hope for the future. And I think that's kind of rarely seen. It's not just about the individual with the epilepsy, that you're helping. It's kind of has that ripple effect, No,
you're absolutely right. I mean, one thing that has always interested me is, we've always been very involved in trials of drugs and devices. And the bit that really amazes me is how you've got something very new and you don't know if it'll work, or maybe it'll even cause people trouble. And people out there with epilepsy and other conditions, they want to be out there being involved and helping other people. And I think, they're so brave going out there and doing all this stuff. If you say to people, you've got a new tablet, you don't know if it'll work, maybe they'll be allergic to it and get some bad reaction or have some other problem, and they'll do it. And most people will say to you, if it's going to help someone else, I'll give it a go. And I think that's amazing.
I do. And in addition, I always try to give you guys sort of recognition as well. Like, people don't really know about the extra work that goes on behind the scenes. I was talking to somebody the other day about the amount of time and money that is spent on conferences and whizzing around the world and, making grant applications and all these different things. So I think we have people working on all sides to improve the health of people affected by the epilepsies.
Yeah, I agree. And people, I think, sort of appreciate that, people with epilepsy can see around them that there's all of this huge community of people all around the world trying to help all the time, doing new things, trying to discover new ways of fixing problems, developing new drugs and other treatments. I think it's a really great time, and so much good is happening that everyone should feel inspired that they will be helped. And if it's not them directly, it'll be other people with epilepsy. Everyone is benefiting from the work that's being done at the moment.
We were going to speak actually about I suppose there's nothing good to be said about it, the over-reporting and under-reporting of seizures when it comes to a patient or their carer coming to see their clinician. You did a paper recently on this called How Big is the Problem? Just over and reporting seizures, how big is the problem? So tell us about that. How big is this problem?
So I've been really interested in this. I mean, normally when we monitor people for seizures, we bring them into hospital and we stop their tablets and we stop them sleeping, usually because we're trying to catch seizures happening, because we want to figure out what sort of seizures they are and see if we can figure out which part of the brain they're coming from and all of that. So we're trying to induce seizures. And we knew from doing it in hospital that there was a problem where people would over-report seizures. So they would say, maybe I had a seizure, and they would log that in their diary, and yet we knew there wasn't a seizure happening. And on the other hand, they would sometimes be having seizures that they didn't know about. And we know that happens a lot because seizures start from parts of the brain which are involved in the machinery of memory. And that part of the machinery stops working temporarily, and it's a really strange thing, and it's a really startling thing for people with seizures to suddenly realize that they're with people who are telling them that they've just had a seizure, and not only do they not remember the seizure, but they're sometimes irritated by other people suggesting it and get a bit frustrated and angry, and it's a really difficult time. So we knew these were problems, and we did a study over 10 years ago now where we put devices inside people's head to record seizure activity continuously, and we could see that they were having lots of seizures they didn't know about. And they were also having, and we didn't report that at the time, they were also having lots of events reported that weren't seizures. And, these are really big problems because people with seizures, especially when they're in hospital, obviously, they're trying to help. They understand you're trying to catch their seizures and record them. And so they're trying to help by saying, yeah, I think I might have had a seizure. Log that down. That's when I had a seizure, and have a look at the recording. And you say, well, you didn't have a seizure then. Now, sometimes seizures are very small. They're just a warning or a feeling, and we might not see them on a scalp recording. So maybe some of the things that people are reporting when they think they're having a seizure, but we can't see it, maybe they are little seizures, but we just can't see them. But often people are saying, I had a big seizure and I blacked out, and you can see that they're not. So we knew this was a hospital problem. But what's become really available in recent times is the ability to be able to record people at home, ambulatory EEG monitoring with video. And that's really been a huge change. So you can watch people in their own environment and with their family and friends around them, and you get a really, really deep understanding of what's happening, because people are saying they're having seizures, and sometimes they're speaking to the people with them and saying, I think I had a seizure, and the people with them say, yeah, I think you did too. But you can see they didn't have a seizure. You can see that nothing happened and there's nothing electrically happening. So it's a really weird thing. And again, I think it's because when you have a condition, it's like if you have any medical condition, if you have any symptom, you tend to think of it being related to that condition, right? So
makes sense, right?
Some muscle problem and you get a headache, you think, well, maybe it's my muscle problems causing the headache, and so on. So lots of normal phenomena that everyone experiences, your heart racing or feeling a bit anxious or feeling unexpectedly hot and sweaty, or thinking maybe I felt sick and I can't remember what happened for the last few moments. You think, well, maybe that was a seizure. And often it is, but often it isn't. And we can see this, by having these systems now in people's homes and recording them 24 hours a day. You can say, well, look, a lot of things, maybe most things that you're thinking are having seizures are not actually seizures. Maybe a lot of them are little seizures that we can't see, but either way, they're probably not going to affect your life a lot. But on the other hand, we've seen that about 2/3 of seizures that people are actually having, the person having them doesn't know about.
And that 2/3, do they tend to be more focal seizures, or could they be even tonic or tonic-clonic? Or
they're often the idiopathic generalized seizures, like absences, where people are zoning out very briefly and the people around can see but they can't. But most of them that we see are focal seizures. And the interesting thing is that even people who are with them often don't recognize them. Even family and friends and carers who are very familiar with the seizures, even if they're very close to them physically, don't actually recognize that a seizure's occurred. So these are really big problems, and they're a big problem because, as a clinician, people come along with their family and carers and tell you what's been happening, and you ask them how many seizures they're having. They've got a diary, and you think, okay, so they're having a lot of seizures, so I give them more medication. Or they're not having any seizures at all, so maybe they don't need as much medication, or maybe I don't need to do anything. But in fact, that's often inaccurate. So people are having a lot more seizures than they know they're having, but on the other hand, they're reporting a lot of the events they report are not actually seizures. Now, they don't have any way of stopping that. Everyone's trying to do the right thing. It's not as though they're not out there trying to say we're having seizures deliberately when they're not. They're out there thinking that the symptoms that they're experiencing are seizures when they might not be. And we as clinicians are depending on that to adjust their treatment and decide whether they're able to drive or do a dangerous job or whatever. And often we turn to family members and say, well, have you guys seen anything? And the family say, well, no, we haven't seen anything either. And I used to think, that was pretty valuable information and it's pretty reliable, but it turns out it's not as reliable as you'd hope. So these are big problems. And this trend towards ambulatory monitoring around the world, largely through developments in the technology, so that you can put cameras and recording things, and the internet lets you transmit the data and so on. So you can actually do this realistically in people's homes now, even over very great distances, which you've never been able to do. And I think this is really going to change things. There are other developments too, because, even with the home monitoring, we're still only talking about days or a week or so of monitoring. And a lot of people are having events less frequently than that. So, there's a new generation of devices that are being developed by a number of groups now, putting implants in under the scalp, because like I said, we put this device in over 10 years ago now inside the head, but that was tricky because it required a big operation. It was difficult to manage and so on. But you can put these newer devices underneath the skin of the scalp and record the EEG 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and you get this really deep understanding of what's going on with someone's seizures. So we see in there's studies around this sort of work now that they're not reporting events that they're having, and they're having a lot of other events that we can see. And on the other hand, as with the ambulatory monitoring, a lot of the things they're describing are just not seizures. So it's really, really interesting. And we've seen this in the cardiac world. So in the cardiac world, 10 years ago or more, they developed devices that could be just put under the skin of the chest and recorded people's heart all the time. And a lot of people have said they were having palpitations or other heart problems, which up until then had been pretty mysterious, were suddenly diagnosable because you had something in there all the time. And you could say, well, this is what happened. And we will be doing that with epilepsy soon. So I think this is the start of a really big change, where for the first time we can see what's really happening. And that means you can adjust treatments. You can help people decide when it's safe to do things. You can tell them when it's right for them to go out. You can do all sorts of things. And, I've been very interested in seizure prediction in the past, and you need these sorts of devices to be able to predict people's seizures. But all these things are possible with the technology that we have now. And so we're right on the edge of all this. So a lot of people are working in this area and lots of things are happening.
MedTech is a great industry in which to be, I think, at the moment, isn't it? You get to see things from all different perspectives. And as people often think it's all just like terrible and it's all about money. And don't get me wrong, there will be people like that. But the people that I've met at the various conferences which we met and everything and online, they actually want to know what it's like to be a person affected by an epilepsy or a family member, so that they can produce the best product or service possible, right?
I think that's absolutely right. And people say that, it's all about money. There has to be money involved in some point, because someone's got to actually make all this stuff happen. But, in my experience, everyone in this area, whatever their interest is, that they're motivated primarily with trying to make people better. And that's what drives it along. Along the way, you need to pick up people who can actually make it work financially, but someone's got to be driving it who's got an interest in making things work for people with epilepsy.
And just going back to the whole finance side, actually, just quickly, I find that lots of people, especially in certain countries like Australia, like the UK, money's involved. We pay our taxes. And it's like, well, unfortunately, darling, like these things have to be paid for. So it does have to come from somewhere, right?
That's right. It does have to be paid for, and it's got to be worth something to someone. Now, that might be the person, or it might be a company, or it might be the government, or it might be society as a whole, but somewhere along the line, someone's got to be prepared to support it financially. I mean, there's nothing else that we do in the world pretty much that isn't supported at some point financially by someone, whether it's medications or whether it's social support services. Everything's supported at some point, and it's got to be worthwhile, and we have to prove that. So I think that's the job for a lot of researchers. We've got a lot of interesting ideas about this and that. That doesn't mean that it's going to, one, help anyone, or two, be valuable. And it must be valuable in some sense. And like I say, that's not necessarily an evil thing. Everyone sort of talks about it as though, it's companies making money, and it might be a government, it might be a hospital system, a health service, whatever. Someone's got to be able to get a benefit from it. And if they can't, that probably means it's not really helping anyone.
That's a logical. And I also want to mention to you, or bring up with you, when you said we have all these like subscalp EEG devices which are taking us places, which of course is true, but sometimes we find out that a person is not necessarily having seizures when they think they are. Do you sometimes find out they're having non-epileptic seizures? And if so, or they have like extreme anxiety, perhaps causing them the feeling, what happens when a person is in that situation? Do you redirect them to like a psychiatrist? What happens?
Well, I think that's a really good question. Interestingly, in a study we've done recently with a subscalp thing, we found that some patients were having events which turned out to be actually cardiac in origin. Whoa. And so they were able to get appropriate treatment by cardiologists with pacemakers and so on. We found others who did definitely have an epilepsy before, who turned out to be much better treated than they thought they were. And here's the surprise. So, we always think of this stuff, going to show people having a lot more seizures than they think they are, but actually a lot are having a lot less seizures than they think they are as well. So some of the patients came off treatment, some of the patients returned to driving, and it turned out that a lot of the things they thought were seizures were not actually seizures. So there are two sides to this. It's not all, in inverted commas, bad news where you're saying to people, hey, look, you're much worse than you thought. Often you're saying, hey, you know what, you're actually much better than you thought. Or alternatively, actually what you're complaining of, they're significant events and they're affecting you, but they're not epileptic seizures, and there's a different way of treating them, whether it be your heart or whether it be an emotional thing or whether it be something that requires the assistance of counsellors and psychiatrists. These are problems, nothing to be ashamed of, and it's a great outcome because there's a different treatment, there's a different way of getting to an answer, and there's a better way of letting you get on with your life.
And it's quality of life, and that's the most important thing.
You're absolutely right.
Just one more thing, sorry, you just made me think of this when you were talking. Given we have these devices that enable us to have people do video telemetry, do EEGs from home or wherever, do you feel that gives us real hope for people living in like remote areas, people who live out in the sticks and it takes them ages to get to a hospital, or they can't drive and public transport's rubbish, so how do they get to the hospital? Maybe these services are really good for them too.
And again, the combination of the technology around the recording, the ability to analyze really large volumes of data quickly, and the reach of the internet. So it's like even people in really remote third world communities now, a lot of them have great internet connectivity. And the difficulty is getting people who have the skills necessary to analyze the data. But, everyone sort of says about machine learning stuff and that all the time now, so it's become a bit of a fad. But it is true that these machine learning techniques, with the sort of data that we collect around EEG and so on, are really well suited to automatic analysis, which will let so many more people get the right answers at the time that's relevant to them. And these new technologies, putting implants and so on aside, just being able to put an EEG on someone, collect the data and analyze it quickly, you can't do that in most of the world, and that's a huge impediment to the proper treatment of epilepsy. And now, we've seen publications from people like Sandor Beznicki recently and his collaborators in Scandinavia, who've developed these totally automated techniques for analyzing routine EEG and providing a report. Remembering that until now, the skills for doing this were quite rare, but now a machine can do it. And with the technology that will let you take maybe a mobile phone, a smartphone, with some electrodes out to a remote location and transmit the data across the world and get it analyzed automatically, we're at that point now. And this is really going to change everything.
It is amazing because, as marvelous as we think or wish or hope for ourselves to be, we humans make so many mistakes, don't we? And so to have a machine that can back us up and say, actually, darling, perhaps, look at this part of things. It's like two minds analysing one set of data, right?
Absolutely. And that's the thing, humans aren't totally out of the circuit on these things, right? So, what the machines do typically is reduce what was once a huge and unmanageable amount of data, like EEG data, from a very long or very large number of people over a very long period into a manageable piece of information that you can give an accurate answer on. And I think that's the revolution.
Thank you so much to Mark for sharing with us an uplifting, exciting few minutes talking about MedTech developments in EEG data analysis and what this means and can mean for so many people around the world affected by the epilepsies. Check out more about Mark and his work on the website torierobinson.com, where you can also access, well, not just the podcast, but the video and the transcription of this episode. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to the channel. Share this podcast with your friends, colleagues, family members, and see you next week.